share.
Okay, so now I gotta connect it to the Facebook. Okay, so thank you everyone for joining us. We're just a few minutes off. Sorry about that. So welcome, if you're just joining us, welcome to Live Wednesdays. Live Wednesdays by NDV Healing and Support Incorporated. Live Wednesdays are where we go live and we discuss issues with domestic violence and narcissist abuse. So it is our Live Wednesdays Domestic Violence and Narcissist Abuse 101. And we typically have myself, Theresa Simon, Executive Director and founder of NDV Healing and Support Incorporated, Nicole Davis, board member of NDV Healing Support Incorporated, and Yolanda Oliver. Yolanda Oliver and Rachel Thompson, our other two board members, could not make it tonight for our Live Wednesdays, but we have myself and Nicole Davis. So we're going to go and talk about tonight's topics. Tonight's topics there's a couple of them in there. We're going to talk about the legal reform for domestic violence, as well as co-parenting with an abuser, some issues around that, and then also we're going to give you some tips on how to deal with the trauma bond. Last time we talked about the trauma bond, but this time we're actually going to talk about some tips too to deal with the trauma bond, as well as the legal reform and co-parenting. So thank you everyone for joining us. And Nikki, I think let's start with the legal reform and the co-parenting. Now the co-parenting, you're pretty much the go-to on this one because you've had a lot going on with your son. And what happens typically with abusers and narcissists is they like to re-victimize their victim in the court system. And so that's one of the reasons why we do need legal reform, as well as we need more education on domestic violence and narcissist abuse, because they will use the legal system to re-victimize their victims. So can you talk a little bit about like what happened with your case and how co-parenting with an abuser, how that goes?
Absolutely, yes. And hello to everybody who's watching. Thank you for joining us. So yeah, absolutely. My situation, I came to realize about a year ago that is something that's happening to a lot of survivors and victims of domestic violence, especially after you realize you no longer want to be in the relationship and you want to move on. And it's a way for the perpetrator, the abuser, to still maintain some kind of control in the relationship, even though you're not together, and essentially is very damaging to the child in the process. But what they do is they utilize the court system with custody as a way or a means of still regaining control. So it's like, okay, I'm not able to control this person in the relationship anymore, but I'm going to control the fact. For example, I'll say one of the huge boundaries for me, because my abuser came through my bedroom window and attacked me in the final moments of our relationship, I'm very adamant about him not knowing where I live and about him being able to come to my home. And that is something that it's a boundary that I've set. and it's helpful for me, as a survivor, to move on and minimize my symptoms of PTSD. Well, he utilized the court system to say, well, he's able to know where his child lives. He had it in the order at one point where he could come to my home and pick up our child. And it bothered me. And that is just, if you really think about that, who does that? Who puts in the order, I'm able to come to this person's home? Like it's and to you and I, and to most other survivors or people who are very educated in this area, you see it. You see how that is just not a typical thing. What kind of normal person would want something like that? Whereas a court system who sees many cases every day, who is not educated on domestic violence and does not know what, things to look after, they're just like, well, he just wants to know where his child is. And they completely steamroll, for a better word is what I like to use. They steamroll you, and all the boundaries that you set and all the progress that you've made to become this better person, it's like, well, whatever, we're going to just bypass all of that, because what does it matter? Well, it matters because this person broke into my house, came through my window and attacked me and could have killed me. That was, something that was significant. And a lot of the times the court looks at it as, well, they attacked you. They didn't attack the child. So how is this damaging to the child? Well, children witnessing abuse are more likely to become perpetrators when they grow up. It's also, it causes some of the PTSD that causes them to have those symptoms as well. So they don't have the ability to forge normal relationships as they get older. It's a whole thing. And our system is not educated on this, so they overlook it, and it causes the abuse to constantly be a cycle, because then they grow up, do the same things, their children witness it, and it's a vicious cycle and it never ends. So it was something that, this is what caused me to really want to become an advocate last year, when I just woke up one day and said, I wonder if this is something that happens to other people. And I looked it up and I saw how common it was. And I was like, this has to change.
Yes. So an advocate of legal reform and changes for having, co-parenting with abusers. Now, for those of us that are, those of you that are listening, here are some tips for co-parenting with an abuser or a narcissist. So one tip is to make sure you're setting boundaries, and setting boundaries about communication. So make sure you're doing that. Typically, the less communication, the better, unless it's just, strictly for the child and strictly, those specific subjects, and that's it. So set boundaries about communication. The other thing is seek a parent coordinator or a guardian ad litem appointed for your child. Also, make sure you have a detailed custody agreement so that it's clear and there's no argument about that. Keep very detailed records, and have your child attend counseling, therapy. And also, last but not least, but one of the most important tips is, do not argue with the narcissist. You will not win. And that is, it's the equivalent of talking to a brick wall. It's a complete, you're not going to get through to them. And actually, you'll actually bring more fuel to them, because they want to upset you. So those are some tips for co-parenting with the narcissist or an abuser. Any tips you would like to add, Nikki?
I was just gonna say, not arguing with them is huge, and it's hard to do. And I actually have a normal co-parenting relationship with my eldest daughter's father. And I like to use this as an example, because there are times where we don't always agree on the course of discipline or something with our children. And we do have debates, and we each speak, from our own experiences, and kind of go from there and come to some kind of common agreement. And that's how, and that's a common co-parenting relationship. You're not always going to see eye to eye, and you should be able to talk things out. But with a narcissistic abuser, if you try to to do that, debate with them, argue with them, first of all, that's what they want. Because for one, they want to make you seem like the crazy person. So they're going to gaslight you and say things that are triggering to get a emotional response out of you to make you look crazy and like the unfit parent. And I'm guilty of that happening. You know, I'm human. And in the beginning, I didn't know these things, which is why it's so important for education about this to come out
Yeah.
so that everyone can know.
Yes, that's why we're doing these domestic violence and narcissist abuse 101 lives on Wednesday, because we want to make sure we are educating the masses about domestic violence and narcissist abuse. So anything you want to add, Nikki, before we move on from co-parenting with abuser to our next topic, which is legal reform?
Just the huge don't argue with them. I know that one of the therapists that we had in the support meeting said go gray rock, which is typically what I do. And I just don't engage. You know, if it's about our child, you know, I'll speak whatever needs to be said or what's already been outlined in our court order, but I never go further than that. And whenever he tempts me to do so, I just don't respond. And I found that I have a lot more peace with that as well when I don't get excited, you know, and don't get angry about something. And being a recovering alcoholic, it makes me not want to drink because if I don't engage and I forget that he even sent anything, I'm not upset about anything. So,
yeah. And so for those of you that are just listening and you may not know what gray rock is a method that you can use when talking to a narcissist. If you are co-parenting and it's not, the first and best option is no contact completely. But if you are co-parenting and that's not an option, then the second best option is gray rock. And gray rock as a method it sounds exactly like what it is. It's gray rock. It is no emotion. Just you're going to talk to them straight forward conversation about the child and shut it down after that. There's no other conversation after that. There's no other additional information. There's no emotion. It's just, this is what it is. We're done. That's it. Goodbye. And that's what you have to do when you're talking to an narcissist, because a narcissist wants fuel, and the more emotion, even if it's just the smallest amount of emotion, any emotion they can get out of you, the better for them, the fuel that they're getting. So to counteract that, the best thing to do is to be gray rock, no emotion, because you don't want to feed into what the narcissist is doing. So now we are going to move on to our next topic, because as I told you, we have, for those of you who are just tuning into our Domestic Violence and Narcissist Abuse 101, we just had our first topic where we talked a little bit about co-parenting with an abuser or narcissist. Now we're going to talk about legal reform. And then our final topic will be some tips on how to break that trauma bond. So let's get into legal reform. This is a topic that most domestic violence survivors are really interested in. And I know Nikki has a lot of passion about it, and I do as well, because although we have made so many changes in the legal system in regards to domestic violence, there is still a long ways that we need to go. And there's still a lot of things that need to take place that are not happening right now. So I know my things that I'm passionate about in terms of legal reform, but what are you passionate about in terms of legal reform? What would you like to see, Nikki?
oh my goodness.
She's like, I have so many things.
I know, right? It's so much. One of the huge things that I want to see is I want to see us actually do something with the perpetrators as far as getting to the root of why they are abusive. And I think that that's really helpful for a lot of reasons, primarily because if we're going to go with the method in court where, you know, this is biologically their child, they have a right to have, you know, access to them. That's great. But if this person is still being abusive in their home, they're exposing my child to it in another setting, which is just as damaging. And if that person hasn't gotten help, even though they have a history of abuse, it's going to be a continuing cycle. If you send them to anger management, that's not going to help them, because regular anger management does not help people who suffer from narcissistic personality disorder or who are typically perpetrators of abuse. They have some underlying deeply rooted issue that is typically stemming from childhood, and it needs to be further examined. And I think that that is just like how they're treating alcoholism and drug abuse now, and they have people going to actually figure out what is causing you to drink. I feel like they need to do that with perpetrators. I would love to see that happening more often in court, where they're actually sent to a mental health professional who's specialized in that, and not just anger management, just a general, oh, you took a 4-hour course online, great. You know what I'm saying? Like, no, something where they're really actually getting to the root of the problem. And I would also like to see more laws that supported this. And what I mean by that is, when you're going to a custody battle with someone, if there's a history of domestic violence in the home, these custody cases should not be treated like every other custody case across the board, because they are not like those cases. And I feel like there should be like a special law, or some type of agreement where they're like, okay, if there's any type of evidence of this happening, a protective order that was once granted, a police report where the police were called out to the house, even if charges weren't filed, we need to follow. There's a certain protocol we need to follow in this custody evaluation before the child is let to be at home alone with the perpetrator, regardless of gender.
Yes, definitely. You touched on some really good points. For me, I would really like to see, well, actually, I would like to see several things happen. But one of the biggest things I would like to see happen is for domestic violence to be taken seriously. I'm not saying in all cases that it's not taken seriously. Let me be clear about that. But there are several cases where it hasn't been taken serious. There was a case out of Kentucky where a woman reported to the police, that, hey, he was being abusive. She called the police. He took the phone away from her, so she couldn't call 911 at the time. The police show up. They didn't even do a report. A month later, she's dead. And so that was something that could have been prevented had that have been taken seriously. You look at even, myself in my situation, that really wasn't taken seriously, because if we have a person who has been arrested for multiple domestics, they shouldn't get a slap on the wrist. It sends the wrong message to the abuser, because it sends the message to the abuser that, okay, I could pretty much, do what I want to do, because I'll get out in a small amount of time. And so we have to start the criminal justice system. There definitely needs to be reform. We have to start sending the message that this is a very serious offense, and people need to be charged accordingly. And if there are multiple charges for it, then that needs to be charged accordingly too. There needs to be additional time for that. It shouldn't just be that, a person continues to commit domestic violence and they get a small amount of time for that, because eventually that person is going to end up, potentially killing someone. And then what? So you're going to wait until the person kills someone? That seems very backwards to me. So I definitely think that the criminal justice system needs to send the message that this is a serious offense. In some areas, there are domestic violence cases where they're considered misdemeanors in some instances. And I think that's kind of sending the wrong message also. I don't think, that it should be a misdemeanor, because this is a serious crime. People die every day from this, and there are thousands, that die yearly. So this is something that needs to be sent, that this is an epidemic, and it needs to be treated like it's an epidemic. So that's the first thing I would definitely say. And one of the women that joined our community discussion panel that we had last week, Ladina, she brought up a really good point. She said there needs to be a domestic violence registry nationally, just like there's a sex offender registry. There should be a domestic violence registry. And I think that's really good too, because especially that goes back to what I said before, when there are people that have multiple domestics, you would be able to see, okay, this person has multiple domestics, and there's multiple cases with this person, that would be set people on alert, and potentially people would say, okay, maybe I need to stay with this person, or maybe they just started dating this person, now they know. So I think that's something that would also help too. The other thing I think is that address protection program that you brought up before. If you're just joining us, last week she had brought up the address protection program, and I think that's something that needs to be implemented everywhere, because the address should not be able to be freely put, of the address of the victim, let me be clear, the address of the victim should not freely be able to be put in different databases, because the abuser can get access to that information, and we want to make sure that we're keeping the address of the victim as confidential as possible, so that the abuser cannot find them.
I was gonna say, I also think that it's interesting that so many people are so quick to judge victims and say, oh, well, why don't you report them to the police? Why don't you send them to jail? Well, they're gonna go to jail for a month and get out and possibly come out and kill me. So, I mean, you know what I'm saying? Because if the law is not gonna take it seriously and keep them in jail, why am I sending them there just so I can be a sitting duck, when I get out? I mean, it happened to one of my coworkers. She didn't even call the police. A stranger walking by her house heard her yelling for help. And she was conflicted as to whether she should testify against her husband, because she was scared that he was going to get out. And I was like, well, he's been convicted of assault before. A stranger called the police. They have to keep them in there. They kept him in there for 3 months. And the thing was, it was 3 months till he went to court. So the judge basically let him out from court. And it's like, it becomes a slap in the face, because this is my life. And so she ended up fleeing to West Virginia, a whole nother state, to go live with her aunt, because she was afraid that he was going to come back to the house and he was going to murder her. And why does it have to get to that place? And we get ridiculed for not taking action sooner, but the law doesn't keep them in jail anyway.
No. And that goes back to what I just said about these cases have to be taken seriously. It cannot be an assembly line of domestic violence cases through the district attorney's or state's attorney's office, to where we're not, looking at these cases and seriously evaluating how much time this offender should get. And especially if, like you said, they've already been charged with other domestic violence or battery situation, there's no way that they should just be getting a small amount of time. And it's not just that case. It's not just my case. There are several cases where this is happening, and they're getting 3 months, 6 months, 12 months, 11 months, and they have had prior domestic violence cases, and that's not okay.
And also in my situation, and I'm not excusing my drinking and driving by any means, but the more DUIs you get, the more time that you get. I mean, you could get a DUI. You could be sitting in your car, not even driving the car, but your keys could be in the ignition, and you can get a DUI and potentially go to jail for years.
Right.
But you can physically assault someone and hurt someone with the intention of doing it, and you can do no time at all. And it could not be your first time. It could be your third, fourth time, because that's just how the system is set up right now.
Right. And the issue with that is like I said, it sends the wrong message to the abuser, but also you have to think, in domestic violence cases, a lot of these cases end up in homicide. So yeah. The person who is committing this offense, the abuser who's committing this offense of abuse, they have the potential to kill this person. So this is a serious offense, because they more than likely, statistically, they may kill this victim. And so it blows my mind that this is an offense where they can potentially kill this person, but yet we're giving them 12 months, 11 months, 3 months. So it's sending the message to the abuser that this is not a big deal. And it's also sending the message to the victim that your life doesn't really matter. And so
Yes,
we definitely have to change that. That can't continue to happen.
absolutely.
And I think some of the other legal reforms too, that I like that you also touched on too, that the mandatory classes, because I just find it interesting that, like you said, they need to get down to the root of the problem as to what happened in childhood, what is causing them to do this. And I think, yes, that definitely should be a mandatory component, and it should be serious classes, not some, like you said, not some little quick 4 hour or 3 hour little online thing, but some serious classes, serious counseling, because they need to be able to productively be in society, and that it would help if they can get to the root of the problem. They can have counseling. They can have classes and real classes,
Hmm.
because just sending them out back into the world without any type of getting to the problem, any type of evaluation, to me is very problematic.
Well, it's counterproductive because it's just, they went through whatever notion they had to go through, and now they're just back, and they never got to the problem, and they're just back, and they're going to keep, going into that cycle because they haven't gotten into the root of the problem. I even have gone out and said before that, how they had dare when we were like children in school, they had drug, the cops come and talk to you about drugs. I feel like even domestic violence should be something that's taught to children in public education, like in schools, that that it's wrong, so that children can learn about it. Kids go through their whole childhood not knowing that that's abnormal and that shouldn't be happening. And I think if there was a place they went to, like school, and they're like, oh, this is actually wrong, they could get some kind of foundation in there, at least knowing that it's not acceptable behavior, so that they don't, so it may not completely stop them from growing up to falling into that cycle, but it could minimize it.
Yes, yeah, I think that's a good point, because a lot of some of the other domestic violence agencies, and down the road, NDV wants to work on that as well. Teach about teen dating violence, because teen dating violence is on the rise, and that is there is a form of that, domestic violence, and it happens to teenagers. So I think, yeah, as young as we can get them to learn about that, just like we teach them young about saying no to drugs, and we teach them young about other things, I think it's good to teach them young as well about domestic violence, so that they will know, and they will know warning signs to look for and things like that. So prevention is always key.
Yes, absolutely.
Okay, and anything else you wanted to say on legal reform before we move away from that topic? But that is a huge topic. And for those of you that are just tuning into our Domestic Violence and Narcissist Abuse 101, thank you. And you can also put in the comments what you would like to see for legal reform. So those of you that are watching, please feel free to put in the comments. Especially, we would love to hear from you what you would want to see in legal reform as well.
You know what? I did think of one more thing.
Sure, go
I
ahead.
I see more often than not where supervised visits are necessary, and they're not put into place. And I feel like, especially if there's domestic violence present, that there should be a certain time frame of supervised visits before the child is released unsupervised into the perpetrator's home.
Yeah, I think that also needs to be revisited as supervised visits, because there's some instances where that really isn't a good idea. Um, and then too, they're and then there's some cases where it is necessary because of the fact that while co-parenting, sometimes the abuser will try to lure the victim back into the house, so that the victim can either potentially assault the victim or murder the victim. So yeah, that the whole system needs to be there. Definitely needs to be just a ton of reform.
One thing I wanted to say something in just in case there is someone who's watching who's co-parenting with someone. My ex tried that ordeal where he was like, you know, you and a lot of people don't know right now, I am not the physical custodial parent right now. I get visitations and he lives with his father because of my history with DUIs and drinking. So with that, he tried to play the game where I had to come into his house and do these visits. And he would not allow my son to come to my house unless I came into his house. And I'm telling you guys about this because I want you to understand how powerful boundaries are and standing your ground is, because I refuse to, because it makes me uncomfortable and it makes my PTSD symptoms increase in closed spaces or when I get close to him. And I did not want to go in his house. I did not feel comfortable or safe going into his house. And I made that known. And when we did get back in front of the judge did find him guilty of contempt. And he held him accountable for that and was like, that wasn't appropriate, because it's not. So if you are co-parenting and you find yourself in that situation where the other parent is like, well, come in my house, or I'm not going to give him back to you unless you come in my house, don't feel like you're going to go to court and they're going to condemn you or something for not going in the house, or saying, well, you could have got him if you just went in the house. That won't happen. And it's inappropriate for them to do that. And I just wanted to speak on that because you don't know what is laying on the other side of that door or what they may do to you. And there's a lot of cases, even though people say, well, they're not going to do anything to you. It's been years. They're not going to do anything to you. There have been cases, especially in contested custody battles, where they do it. You know, people lose their minds and they'll do it. So just be careful out there with that. And I just wanted to say that.
Yes, definitely. That's a good piece of advice. And yes, there have been a lot of cases where that has unfortunately happened, where the abuser has tried to lure the victim back into the house on the premise of, this is how you need to do this so that you can see your kids. And then unfortunately, they end up either assaulting or murdering the victim. So yes, don't ever feel like you are obligated to go into the house. If you feel uncomfortable going into the house, don't, because as what happened in Nikki's case, once it did go to court, she was able to let the judge know what he was trying to do by forcing her to come into the house. And the judge let him know that that's not acceptable. So don't ever feel like you are obligated to go inside of the abuser's house to visit your children or pick up your children. So yes, that's, we touched on the legal reform, we touched on co-parenting, and last but not least, we are going to touch on tips for dealing with the trauma bond. How do you deal with the trauma bond? It was such a huge topic when we did it last week. We actually got a lot, we thank everyone for watching. We got a lot of compliments about, they want us to continue doing live Wednesdays. They really like the helpful information for domestic violence and narcissist abuse 101. And we also got a lot of questions about trauma bonding as well. And some people wanted to know about tips about trauma bonding, and then some people wanted to know additional information about trauma bonding. So I'm going to touch on that. And if you are watching, go ahead and put in the comments what you would like to see on legal reform, and also go ahead and put in the comments on how you're dealing with the trauma bond. So I'm going to get right into some tips here. But before I get into the tips, for those of you watching, this may be your first time watching us. So I just want to reiterate what the trauma bond actually is. Now, the trauma bond, that will happen during the narcissistic idealization phase, and that will be love bombing. So love bombing will occur, and then, because they're trying to create that trauma bond as well. So that will typically occur during that idealization and devaluation phase of the narcissist abuse cycle. So let me get into what trauma bonding is. What is trauma bonding? Trauma bonding is a type of toxic bond or dysfunctional bond through trauma that occurs when an abuser alternates between creating highs and lows within the relationship and offers reward or punishment as they deem fit. Tends to be strengthened by inconsistent positive reinforcement, or at least the hope of something better. Thus, cycles of abuse are followed by intermittent love, or reward, and the abuser will train the victim that happiness is solely dependent on how well the victim can please the abuser. The trauma bond can long outlive the relationship. So if you're in the relationship for 6 years, the trauma bond could potentially last 10 years. And it will leave the victim craving comfort for the very person who hurt them. Trauma bonding causes a biochemical addiction, which is why going no contact with the abuser or leaving the relationship is similar to a withdrawal from alcohol or drugs. Your brain becomes addicted to the habitual ups and downs of oxytocin, which is a chemical that is released when a woman has a baby to bond with the baby, dopamine and serotonin, and you crave the abuser. It is the rewiring of the neurological pathways, and trauma bonds occur, or sometimes they form in childhood because of childhood trauma, or a trauma bond with parents or caregivers, or inconsistent patterns with parents, or unresolved past trauma. Because of its addictive nature, it can be difficult to break free from a trauma bond on your own. Cognitive behavioral therapy, CBT therapy, or therapy and coping mechanisms, different ways to stay away, can really help those who are experiencing a trauma bond, as you may have to work to retrain your mind and work on going no contact with the abuser. So that is what the trauma bond is. It is an addiction. It is an addiction just like alcohol or an addiction to drugs. It is an actual addiction. So what are ways and tips that you can try to break the trauma bond? So there's a couple of them. I'll start with one is making a commitment to live in reality. So this is for like if you find yourself fantasizing or constantly thinking about the abuser, or you get that impulse or that urge to want to talk to them, and you're fantasizing about them, you're fantasizing about the good times that you have with them, and you're not really focusing on any of the bad times, right? Like any of the abusive times, but you're thinking of all of the happy times. You have to remind yourself that you need to live in reality, like live in right now. So think about, not necessarily focus on the abuse, but live in what is going on right now, so that you're not romanticizing the situation. And even if you don't choose to leave the abusive relationship immediately, because sometimes it may take time and you need to come up with a safety exit plan, in the meantime, you can at least remind yourself that you will stop fantasizing about what is not happening. So you're not fantasizing about this is like a wonderful relationship and everything is great and we're thinking of the good times. You're still living in reality and still knowing that you're in an abusive relationship. So that is one tip. Another tip is so basically it touches on what I just said, is you're just going to live in real time. So you're not going to think about like what could happen. You know, maybe the abuser could get better. Maybe they will stop abusing. It's not holding on to that could thinking. You're going to notice what is currently happening. They're currently abusing me. They're currently mistreating me, not thinking of that the abuser could get better. And so you're going to think about, and notice how unloved you feel, how mistreated you feel, how you don't feel like there's any respect. You're going to notice those things and pay attention to how those things make you feel, and stop focusing and hoping on the hoping and the wanting of the abuser to be different. Another way is to live one decision at a time and basically live one day at a time. Take it one day at a time. Some people tend to scare themselves with like the all or nothing thinking. It has to be this way. It has to be. So it's just living one day at a time. Like we're in this day and we're going to, focus on one day at a time. It's not like I have to go no contact immediately, or I have to stop talking to them right now today immediately. I mean, ultimately that may be a goal to go no contact, but right now let's focus on today. Today I haven't talked to the abuser. Today I haven't made contact with them. So it's kind of just taking it one day at a time. And when you do the healing process, that's something else that you go through as well. You take it one day at a time, because healing is not, I say this all the time. I'm probably like a broken record, but it's the truth though. Healing is not linear, and it looks different from anyone, and it looks different for everyone. I'm sorry. And so therefore, you don't have to just have this rigid, time frame, and it has to be this way or that way. Just take it one day at a time. Make decisions that support your self-care. Self-care is so huge, and especially it's huge, period. Because I think everyone can agree with 2020, everybody went through a lot, right? This is a year that everyone went through a lot. So self-care is huge just from that aspect alone, but then being in an abusive relationship, and coming out of that, it's huge. So make the decisions that are going to support self-care, and make sure that you are, taking adequate care of yourself. Don't make decisions that are going to ultimately hurt you or that are not good for you. So this goes through, this goes back to making sure we're telling ourselves good things. You don't need, make sure we're telling ourselves things that are uplifting, not berating yourself for if you've had a bad day, or if you've, okay, well, I called him today. Okay, but yesterday you didn't. So not berating yourself for going through that healing process, because we all, it takes time. It's definitely a journey, and it's definitely, a work in progress in healing. And one thing you can do is, when you're getting that impulse, is that, every time you get that impulse to want to talk to the abuser, you can stop and think about each choice that you make. And while you're stopping and thinking about the choices, it could definitely help. And so, ask yourself, am I making a choice that is in my best interest? But when you find yourselves at those moments where the trauma bond is really strong, that's what this is referring to. Make sure that you're not berating yourself like, oh my God, I can't believe I actually want to call him, because that's not helpful to making yourself feel better. It's not helpful to you. Another tip is start feeling your emotions. This is a huge one, because a lot of times, sometimes we talk ourselves out of that. So whatever you are feeling, it goes back to that saying, an unpopular belief that letting go of a toxic person, you still go through grief, right? So it's letting you feel whatever it is that you feel in that moment. So whenever you are away from the toxic person in your life or the abuser, and you feel tempted to reach out to them, just have a moment where you pause and you stop and think. Consider writing your feelings down instead. So you can write whatever comes to your mind. It could just kind of be like a freestyle thing, or you could write something like, I feel whatever it is that you're feeling. I feel sad. I feel this, or whatever. I miss so-and-so. I wish I could be with so-and-so right now, but I'm going to write my feelings down instead. I'm going to teach myself how to retrain my way of thinking, retrain my mind and my brain through the impulses, rather than turning to such and such's name. So this will help you work on breaking the trauma bond, and it will also help you work on building strength. So just learn to simply be with your emotions, feel your emotions, and don't try to talk yourself out of your emotions or ignore your emotions. You don't need to run from them, hide them, or avoid them. Just make sure you fully feel them. And once you start to do that, eventually they will subside. But one of the biggest things is the only way out of those emotions is going through those emotions. So you have to allow yourself to fully feel them without trying to talk yourself out of them. The other tip is learn to grieve. So, and that goes back to what I said about that unpopular belief that there is still grief involved with letting go of a toxic relationship or an abusive relationship, because you genuinely did care for this person, even though, this happened. So letting go of a toxic and abusive relationship and breaking that trauma bond is extremely difficult. It's one of the most difficult things that you will do in your life. And I'm not going to even sugarcoat that at all for you. It's extremely difficult. But you can't do it without acknowledging the fact that you've lost something. Something you may have had in your mind that this is the person you were going to marry, or whatever the case may be, but you still lost something. So you need to acknowledge that and be able to grieve and learn to grieve for that. The other thing is understanding that the hook. So you're going to identify what it is that you're losing specifically. So is it a fantasy that you're losing? It could be that it was a fantasy, a dream, an illusion, that you felt like, okay, this was the person I was going to marry. But, a lot of times abusers are narcissists, not all of them, but a big chunk of them may be narcissists. And so therefore, they could have just been mirroring you, which is what narcissists do. They mirror you to, okay, you want to get married, they're going to act like they want to get married. You want to have kids, they're going to act like they want to have kids. So it could have just very well be that it was a fantasy or an illusion. They convince you that they were going to fulfill some deep unmet need. These are some of the things that narcissists do. But once you identify whatever it is and what's that need or that hook was, then you can get down to the real business of grieving the relationship and trying to move on and breaking that trauma bond. So you're going to, say goodbye to whatever it is, that fantasy, that illusion, or whatever that need that you may not have met. Because by now that you're going through this process, you're starting to know that it will never be met by this relationship, this unhealthy relationship. And then we got a couple more tips here. So write a list of bottom line behaviors or boundaries. So write down and make your list of boundaries. For example, I will not be in a relationship with someone who calls me names or berates me. I will not argue with someone who has been drinking. I will take care of my own finances. I will not have conversations with anyone when I feel, when I feel these impulses. Whatever your boundaries look like for you, those are just examples, but whatever your boundaries look like for you, write those down so that you can remind yourself of what your boundaries are. Whatever your areas of concern may be, that looks different to everyone. Everyone has different boundaries, but remind yourself of what they are. So that way you can determine what you need, what changes you need to make to your boundaries, and then, stick to those bottom line behaviors or those boundaries. And then my favorite part, you're coming out of this, you're coming through this, you rebuild your life. So little by little, and it is little by little, it takes a lot of steps. Because I've been in 2 abusive relationships. The first one, I've been out going on about almost 12 years, 11 years, 11 and a half. The second one, I haven't been out. It hasn't been a year yet. So it's literally little by little you rebuild your life. And you little by little you rebuild your life, and you start thinking about your future and your goals and and the things that you want to do, and you start having that life after abuse. And so make sure that your dreams, we'll try not to focus on your dreams and your goals, that not to focus on that abusive person. It may be difficult at first, but, try to look at your goals and your dreams without that person in mind. Maybe you want to go back to school, and, just to let you guys know, in DV Healing and Support Incorporated, we do have a program that is called Moms Going Back to School. And we work with you to help, you rebuild that life after abuse and help you with trying to get back into school. Maybe you need help with the FAFSA, maybe you need resume assistance. Maybe you have a business plan. There's a business incubator that can help you get started with your business. So just wanting to remind you about that. There is a Moms Going Back to School program. Maybe you want to start a new hobby. Maybe you want to go back to church. Whatever it is that you want to do, start making these choices and these actions towards your goals. And that way it will take you away from the toxic interactions and, with your abusive partner, and you'll start to rebuild your life and start to get back a peace of mind, start to get back a sense of self, and, get that much further towards your goals. The other thing is build healthy relationships and connections with people, healthy friendships, healthy relationships. That's how you can free yourself from unhealthy connections and toxic relationships. So start investing yourself into healthy relationships. Develop other close bonds and other connections, and a support system. It doesn't necessarily, that support system can consist of many different people. It doesn't have to consist of a specific set of people. It could be family, it could be friends, it could be, a neighbor that you've gotten close with, but build healthy relationships. Make these people your go-to people or your tribe. And, notice those people that in your life that are showing you loving concern, that are patient with you, that genuinely care about you, and hang around them as often as you can, and, have them as your support system through this. And of course, as always, reach out for professional help and make sure that you are investing in therapy. And then finally, last but not least, one of the most important tips, which is go no contact. I did mention last week the app called Day Count. If you haven't used it, I would suggest using it because it's a tangible way for you to see how many days and how many weeks and months that you've gone without talking to the abuser. But if for whatever reason, and everyone has different situations, no contact is not possible, then as a last resort, go get Gray Rock, which we talked about before. And that is just very no emotions, short answers, just a very specific conversation, and then you're done with the abuser. So then that way they're not getting that emotion out of you. So those are a few tips for breaking that trauma bond addiction to the abuser. Like I said, I love going over that just because that is one of the biggest questions I get as a domestic violence and narcissist abuse advocate is, what is the trauma bond? And then once people know what that addiction is, then they kind of understand. Or another question I get a lot of times is, why do people stay in abusive relationships? And that is one of the biggest reasons, is that trauma bond addiction. So those were some of the tips that I had on breaking the trauma bond. Nikki, I know I've been talking a lot here. So did anything, any tips that you would want to add to that you've done with the trauma bond to break your trauma bond?
I think one of the huge things, because also just like we discussed previously, trauma bond is very similar to alcoholics, and I am a recovering alcoholic. So one of the things that worked for me, and it doesn't necessarily mean it works for everyone, but I found that it was something that helped with both, is working out. And that's something that I've really promoted, going for walks or just raising your heart rate in some way, because it naturally raises the oxytocin levels in your brain without having to introduce any type of chemicals. So I feel like that's huge because it helps take the edge off of the cravings to want to speak to them. It also helps fill up your time, right? So you don't have that extra time to want to talk to them, even if you wanted to, you turn around and it's time to go to work. So I think that that's huge, because that's also something that I used when I started to stop drinking. Before I was able to on my own just not want to drink, I still wanted to drink, So even getting out of a relationship, with a narcissistic abuser, don't feel bad if you want to talk to them, because an alcoholic can know that alcohol is ruining their life. Doesn't mean that they want to stop drinking when it's time for them to stop drinking, but they know that they have to do it. So, just recognizing that, it is something I need to stop doing. I have to stop it communicating with this person, finding different activities. And I know that that's hard during the pandemic, but trying to find different activities to fill up your planner and your schedule so that you don't have the time or the means to think about them. Um, and just ensuring that the block button is my best friend. I love Mr. Blocked. So like I didn't see the messages. I mean, he could have very well been sending messages to me. I didn't see them because he was blocked out of my phone. So that kind of helped the out of sight, out of mind, and helped me not focus on him as well.
Yes, definitely. I would say, because I know for a lot of the victims that are dealing with trauma bond, a lot of times they don't want to block the abuser because, like when dealing with narcissist abuse, and this goes back to narcissist abuse, they're looking for that Hoover. So a lot of times for narcissist abuse, they want that Hoover, and that Hoover is when the narcissist abuse person will come back into the victim's life to try to love bomb them and basically just start the cycle back over again. And sometimes victims are kind of looking for that Hoover after they've been discarded by the narcissist. So a lot of times that's why they won't block the number off the phone, because they're still looking for that. But definitely, as you work through that trauma bond, definitely would encourage you to go no contact if possible and block the abuser, because like you said, it will be difficult at first, but it will eventually bring you peace of mind, because you won't know what it is that they're saying, whether they're ranting or not, or whatever it is that they're sending you, you won't know because they've been blocked and there's no way, there's no communication going on.
And that was because even though I kicked my abuser out, a part of me still wanted him to contact me. We had a kid together. A part of me still wanted that communication. But I found with him being unblocked, whether he did or didn't, I wouldn't know. And I thought that was better. It was better than it hurting my feelings and him not reaching out to me. And it was also better than him reaching out to me and me falling for it and falling back in the cycle. So I was just kind of like, blocked is the best. Leave him there and, just move on with my life. And that's what I ended up doing. And it was the best decision I ever could have made.
Yes. And then even going back to our legal reform, like there are states like New York that's working on, they're looking at, promoting fairness and due process in the criminal justice system. So they're looking at reforms and eliminating bail and pretrial detention. So they're also looking at that bail, when they're looking at the reform, they're also looking at that bail in regards to domestic violence cases. So there are some states that are trying to look at reform in those avenues, but it definitely is something that needs to be across the board nationally. And bail is an interesting concept too, because a lot of times in these domestic violence cases, not all cases, of course, not all cases, but there are a lot of cases where in some aspects the bail was set really low and then they get out on bond and, unfortunately, they come right to the victim's home or where the victim is. So definitely there needs to be reform in regards to the bail system, in regards to the amount of time that they get and the treatment that they get too. So it needs to just be a whole revamp of that when dealing with domestic violence cases.
Well, also, and we need to really pay attention to, and this is something that I found because it's public information, all of these bills that Congress has that are waiting to be voted on as to whether they're laws. There's a few that are domestic violence related and directly relate to everything that we've touched on this evening in regards to how it affects children and all of that. And members of Congress who either introduce or support those bills, we have to really be vigilant on who we have in those seats that do support it, so we know who to support in return. You get what I'm saying? And that's really the game that we have to play in order for it to go where we want it to go. Us talking about it is great, but also making sure that we vote the right people in our Senate, our House of Representatives, in our local government legislations, and making sure that we get certain bills passed through is important. And that's another whole topic. I mean, you know what I mean? But it's just something that we really have to also pay attention if we really want to start to see some change.
Definitely. And I think too, just having like a panel or just even talking to your local representatives, because again, there needs to be more domestic violence and narcissist abuse education, so that when this abuser or this narcissist is going into the legal system with the victim, that they're not re-victimizing the victim. And some of that happens because there isn't the education on domestic violence and narcissist abuse and some of the things and the tactics that they do.
Yes, because narcissists are very charming and they come
Yes.
off here. So a lot of
they're super charming
when they're speaking with them. I mean, my lawyer even made the comment with my abuser last month when we went to court for custody. And she said, he's so soft-spoken, you would never think that he was an abusive person. And I was like, oh, I know he is. But
yeah, well,
it's because they put on act in front and it comes off here and it's not really sincere. It's a tactic.
Yeah, they know how to play the game. And it's with narcissists, they it's what we call, they put on that mask, and they know when to put it on and they know when to take it off. And so they go into court and they're just, so soft spoken, and they're just so nice, and they're just so charming, and they try to make everyone think, who, me? I didn't do that, and it's a complete act. Complete act.
Yep. Absolutely.
Did you have anything else you wanted to add, Nikki, before we close?
No, I think I got everything out. This is like one of my favorite topics. I could go on and on. But I think I really touched on everything that I wanted to add.
Okay.
How about you?
Well, I just want to make sure that everyone knows. So there's a couple of things before we close. First and foremost, we have this Saturday, October 31st, we have, again, our virtual domestic violence support empowerment series. Those are our bi-weekly support group sessions. So if you have not joined one of those, we encourage you to join those. They are virtual, so that way people can join us from wherever they are. And you still get the benefit of a support group, but it is virtual through Zoom. The other thing about our support groups that make them unique, besides being virtual through Zoom, is that we have special mental health professional guests that come on each session. Each session, there's a different mental health guest, and there is a different topic. So that way survivors get to get an educational piece and learn about a different topic, and they also get to ask questions to the special guest mental health professional. So please join us this Saturday, October 31st. That will be at 5:30 p.m. Central Time, 6:30 p.m. Eastern Time, and 3:30 Pacific Time. So please make sure you join that. You can click on the events tab on our page on Facebook, and it will have more information on how you can join us for our bi-weekly support group session. The other thing is, make sure you are listening to our podcast. Our podcast also gives additional information. It gives a great deal of information on domestic violence and narcissist abuse. And again, we have different guests that come on to the podcast to give really good information on that. So make sure we're almost through season 1. We're actually coming to the end of season 1. So we're going to be on episodes 17 and 18. So you can listen to our podcast pretty much anywhere. They're on Anchor, it's on Apple, it's on iHeartRadio, Spotify. It's pretty much everywhere. So go ahead and do that. It's anchor.fm/NDV healing, and you'll be able to find our podcast. And last but not least, we also have our YouTube channel. So go ahead and please subscribe to our YouTube channel. Our YouTube channel is called Narcissistic Domestic Violence Healing and Support Teaching Lab. And it is videos that are posted, and it sounds exactly like what it is, Teaching Lab, that are videos that give information on domestic violence and narcissist abuse. So again, please listen to our podcast, go subscribe to our YouTube channel, and please join us for our domestic violence support empowerment series. And last but not least, we have an incubator series that will be coming up soon, and we'll be posting information for you to join that. So if you're interested in starting a nonprofit business, or if you're interested in starting a for-profit business, or if you just have an idea for the business but you're not sure how to get started, we will be having information about our incubator session that will be coming up so that you can get started on that and be able to start your business. So thank you everyone once again for joining us for our live Wednesdays, Domestic Violence and Narcissist Abuse 101 with Theresa Simon, Executive Director and Founder of NDV Healing Support Incorporated, and Nicole Davis, Board Member. So thank you again, and we will be seeing you again shortly. So thank you everyone for joining us. We really appreciate it. And go ahead and share this. Thank you. Bye everyone.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.